Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. Thank you all for joining a Startup's Guide to Tokyo. Please take note that this session is being recorded. My name is Wayne C, and I'm supporting the Singapore team, Access to Tokyo Singapore team, hosting this session. Before we get started, I would like to hand over a couple of minutes to our sponsor, Rieko Tagawa-san, who is the Director for Foreign Attraction Companies from Tokyo Metropolitan Government, to share a few words.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Rieko Tagawa from Tokyo Metropolitan Government. I would like to say a few words before starting the Access to Tokyo seminar representing Tokyo Metropolitan Government. First of all, I would like to extend my sincere appreciation for your participation in this seminar and the busy schedule. We are really happy to be here with you, so thank you very much for joining us today. The world is now fighting a tough battle against the coronavirus, and Tokyo as well is engaged in confronting the crisis. Our views of the world are changing significantly in the new normal of the COVID-19 era, and I believe that those of you who are watching this are reviewing your business strategies to respond to changing values. Setting our sight on the post-COVID world, the Tokyo Metropolitan Government pledges to achieve a sustainable recovery where people can continue to shine in all kinds of situations. We look forward to working with you in developing business in Tokyo. In December 2019, the Tokyo Metropolitan Government formulated the Tokyo of the Future strategic vision. To achieve sustainable future growth, it has set goals to become the world's most open city, a city where people, goods, and resources gather from around the globe, and the world's leading startup city, where new industries are constantly born. With such a vision, the Tokyo Metropolitan Government is strongly promoting a variety of measures to support Japanese and foreign companies, startups, and entrepreneurs with advanced technologies in expanding the business. There are various measures to attract foreign businesses to Tokyo, which depends on the degree of interest in expanding to Tokyo. Today, I'd like to give a brief explanation of some of these efforts. First, I'd like to talk about Access to Tokyo. This is our international consultation desks. We have 4 desks in London, Paris, San Francisco, and Singapore. Access to Tokyo team handles inquiries on Japanese market opportunities, providing immediate responses in the local language. Moreover, representatives establish relationships with key hub organizations, government agencies, industrial associations, investors, and so on, to make sure that the program is introduced to a large number of companies. The Business Development Center Tokyo is our free consulting desk, which are located in Akasaka and Marunouchi, heart of Tokyo. The experts on Japanese markets answer your questions and offer advice from the business environment to daily living in Tokyo. We opened a new desk in Hong Kong last October. Here, the services are provided in English, Mandarin, and Cantonese, so please feel free to consult the center. Then, when you reach a stage to proceed your administrative procedures to launch your business, please consult the Tokyo One-Stop Business Establishment Center. You can do your filing process at once in the center for free of charge. In order to boost the growth of startups, Startup Ecosystem Tokyo Consortium was launched last year in collaboration with major players in Tokyo, including research institutions, universities, venture capital investors, startups, and other private businesses and organizations. The strong network of various players is the essence for open innovation. Through this network, we aim to globalize the ecosystem, to nurture diversity, and to increase both inward and outward investment. We welcome your participation to our ecosystem in Tokyo. The Tokyo Metropolitan Government offers other support programs for you, as well as these main measures. Please check our website and SNS for more details. I'd like to conclude my comment by hoping that this seminar will be a fruitful program for you. Thank you very much and enjoy the seminar.
Thank you, Takawa-san, for sharing about the incredible initiatives and support programs provided by TMG to support foreign companies with their expansion to Tokyo. To set some context about this session, every year, the Tokyo Metropolitan Government rounds up a team of technology and startup influencers across the globe to conduct a familiarization trip. During this trip, now held virtually, TMG shares latest updates on Tokyo's very attractive business and technology landscape, best practices, and many more. This year, our goal is to share that information with you. Throughout this discussion, right, if you have any question, please do feel free to drop it in the chat. I'm very excited to introduce our panel and Invest Tokyo ambassadors today. Theodora, Pamela, Mushia, and Mohan, could you please help to kick things off and introduce yourselves, right? And because we're all dreaming of the day we could travel again, maybe a fun, interesting travel experience that you recently had. Let's start with Theodora, please.
Yes, hi, good evening, good morning, and I guess good afternoon, depends on where you are. Thank you for having me, very excited, although I would wish I am physically in Tokyo at the moment. So a memorable moment, I was actually in Tokyo a year ago, and there were too many fun moments, I can't list them all out, but the one I loved the most was I just randomly walked around the street and went into a local restaurant. Little did I know, all the menus were in Japanese. There was nothing in English, but thankfully there were some characters that I was able to just figure out because there are some similarities to traditional Chinese characters. And so I was able to order something, but it was like the most fun thing. It's an adventure. And so, you know, I very much look forward to be able to go back to Tokyo again soon. Just really brief, again, my name is Theodora, Theo for short. I'm the founder of Unconventional Ventures, and we focus on working with startups and entrepreneurs around the world that are solving societal challenges. So, for example, longevity challenge, because none of us are getting any younger. But you know, with that, we want people to be able to look at the opportunities presented by longevity, as well as being able to plan for financial security in the future. Another area of interest is gig economy workers, as well as women in general around the world, helping them uplift and provide them with opportunities. And we also host a podcast called One Vision, where we introduce entrepreneurs and thought leaders around the world to share their inspirational stories. And we have a book coming out called Beyond Good that will extend that story and the vision. So thank you.
Thanks, Theodora. Pamela, please.
Hi, I'm Pemo Theodore. I've actually a media and event producer in Silicon Valley, have been for 11 years. A fun thing that happened to me on my travels, I've actually lived in, counting on my hand now, 4 to 5 countries and had done business. And when I went to Ireland, I was there for about 10 years. I had the most amazing experiences where I was asked to be on television to produce my own post-production television show, and also on practically every radio station in the north and in the south of Ireland. So it was incredible. And I left Ireland and went to Boston, and they phoned me and asked me to be on another radio show. So it only happened in that country, but it was quite amazing luck. I actually have been running Silicon Valley TV in Silicon Valley for 11 years. We've basically focused on investors. I have a massive investor network in Silicon Valley. They're incredibly brilliant people, very unusual and very interesting to interview. We have a great body of work on Silicon Valley TV, YouTube, and also Fintech Silicon Valley. I've been running Fintech Silicon Valley events for 5 years, one in Palo Alto and one in San Francisco. every month. And I've also produced an ebook that's available for free after a year's research on why women are funded less than men. And you can download that on Scribd for free. And that's about all for me. Thank you very much for having me.
Thanks, Pamela. Mushia, please.
Thank you so much for having me, Wayne-san, and for the Tokyo Metropolitan Government for having me as an ambassador. I'm Mushir Ahmed. I'm the founder and managing director of FinStep Asia. FinStep Asia is a venture builder. We work with corporates on their engagement with scale-ups and startups, including running hackathons and accelerators. We also work with scale-ups in their market expansion and growth journey. Lastly, we do content in terms of deep expertise in research. We have done reports on women in fintech, on market entry in different parts of Asia, as well as running large-scale fintech events, including the virtual fintech fair, which had participants from over 90 countries in August of last year. I'm also the co-founder and current board member of the Fintech Association of Hong Kong. In addition, I work very closely on building the startup ecosystem in Asia, in particular across India to Southeast Asia, Hong Kong, and China as co-founder of an initiative known as India Tech Hong Kong. In terms of memory, I was in Tokyo at the end of 2018, just before New Year, Christmas time. A little cold, but still very beautiful. I do amateur photography, and one of the things that my wife gets frustrated with is the amount of time I spend trying to capture sunset. So one of the things that I did was I went to Tokyo Sky Circus Sunshine 60 Observatory and sat on a chair in the cafe overlooking towards Mount Fuji to capture the sunset over Mount Fuji. And that's still one of the moments I remember. I couldn't go to Mount Fuji in a short trip, but I look forward to coming to Tokyo again to do the same. Thank you.
Super cool. Thank you. Mohan.
Hi, everyone. It's a real pleasure to be here. Really thank the organizers for inviting me for this. My name is Mohan, and I run a tech ecosystem platform called E27. So we are based in Singapore, but we focus on the Southeast Asia tech ecosystem. It really started from our naive belief that startups can make the world a better place. And if you look at the Southeast Asia region, since we started in 2012, there have been a lot of challenges and problems that were really only solvable and tackleable by startups. So the growth of the ecosystem has been astounding over the last 8 to 10 years. And now Southeast Asia is actually one of the fastest growing internet ecosystems in the world. So we work very closely with early stage venture capital firms, angel investors, pre-A type investors to help them invest in companies, look for companies to work with across the region. We work a lot with corporations that want to partner with startups through innovation programs, through corporate venture activities that they have. And we actually also work very, very closely with governments across the region, including those that are outside of the Southeast Asian market, like Central Asia, Australia, and to a certain extent Europe. So our goal is to expand the relationships, the networks, and the activities within the Southeast Asia tech ecosystem. And we do this through media on our online platform, through events, which is the Echelon conference that we used to run pre-COVID, and the various forms of consulting programs that we actively run. So if any of you are keen to engage the Southeast Asia ecosystem, I'm more than happy to work with you on that. In terms of great memories, so I have many wonderful memories in Tokyo. I actually first went there in 2007, just before graduating from school. So I went to climb Mount Fuji, used to be active in my younger days. And I think one of my best memories was when I was in Hokkaido. It was snowing, and we were sitting in the onsen that was outdoors. And you had a very beautiful view of the mountains nearby, the snow, while being very, very warm in the onsen environment in a very natural state. Right? And I think not many countries in the world can give you such a well-being, positive kind of feeling. So that's something that I really, really miss about Japan.
Thank you so much for sharing. I think all of us are dreaming for the day where we can actually go back to Tokyo. So excited for once the borders open again. But as we start to progress into the discussion on impressions and opportunities in Tokyo, I would just like to take this opportunity to take a step back, right, and understand what's happening outside of Tokyo for a second. So Theodora and Mohan, if you could do us a favor, could you just briefly share on the impact of COVID-19 on startups in your ecosystem, right? How has it impacted new growth opportunities, and what are some of the trends you're starting to see? Theodora, maybe you could go first, please.
Sure. So I think we can all agree that what we've experienced the last 10, 11 months is nothing but normal. I would stop right there. But if you look at just the fintech ecosystem funding, it almost feels like nothing has happened. There's still a lot of activities in terms of startup fundings. There's still a lot of activities in terms of merger acquisition. But we are seeing a trend that we've been seeing over a year ago, which is the bigger bets are made on later stage companies, more mature companies. And so it almost feels like we are hesitant to make too many bets on smaller seed stage company, which in a way is unfortunate because that's where a lot of the new ideas come from. And along with that, what we are noticing, and I'm sure a lot of us have experienced it with COVID, because of the need for social isolation, because of the need for not being able to travel, we do a lot of things virtually, right? Like what we are doing right now. Technology can do a lot of things, but what it cannot do is it cannot replace the human connection. And so we can use virtual conferences and all kinds of tools to maintain connection to our network. But as far as establishing new ones, that is substantial enough for someone to be able to write you a check, that is really hard. And my worry is that challenge will be compounded for female founders and founders from communities of color, because they're typically a little bit more isolated from the VC ecosystem. And so I worry that in the next year or so, we will continue to see drop in funding in those areas.
Thank you for sharing. Mohan, how's everything looking in the Asia perspective?
Yeah, so I think for Southeast Asia, Singapore specifically, they reacted to COVID very quickly. I think much faster than a lot of the other cities in the region or even in the world, right? Because the cases started happening faster, and we learned from SARS, so we reacted quickly. So I want to give a few examples of things that were done specifically within the startup sector. So the first thing is that actually there was a shift for a lot of companies that were doing B2B to go into B2C. So as an example, right, there's a company called G Life that actually invested. They actually bring food to table from farms in the region to all the top hotels across the country and restaurants. So they had to completely shift to a B2C model because people were not allowed to go to restaurants anymore. So that was interesting because if you look at venture investment, the traditional investment interest has always primarily been B2B, but it was really the B2C business activities that helped save a lot of these companies in this period. The second thing is that the companies that survived or done had to completely build COVID-centric technologies or COVID-centric solutions. So there's another company called Service Unit. They used to do cleaning. With all the offices closed, they didn't really have much of a service, but they actually pivoted to provide deep cleaning services, right? And then they ended up having more revenue in that one quarter than in their entire previous year, because a lot of companies were actually looking for deep cleaning specific services when COVID got detected in their units, as an example, right? So like the pivot of doing services that were more COVID specific was something that really helped. In terms of venture, so at the initial stages, there was definitely a drop in venture, but in totality, right, Southeast Asia had like $8.6 billion in venture investments in 2020, and that was just only 2% lower than the year before, right? At the initial part, a lot of the VCs went into crisis mode, so they were primarily helping their portfolio. But from June onwards, venture activity really started to pick up at a very rapid pace, and I think a lot of the VCs actually used that as an opportunity to look for better deals, to drive down valuations. So I think in a whole, it actually didn't work out to be very bad for the region.
Thank you for sharing. Very interesting insights. I like the fact that you say, companies are starting to pivot their business models into, B2B to B2C, and also creating more COVID-specific products and services. And on the note of what Theodora shared on how, use of virtual means would be good to maintain relationships, but not so much for building new ones. That's a very interesting fact as well. And it's also interesting as to how, Tokyo Metropolitan Government has started to digitize almost all of their support programs for foreign companies during 2020 as well, just to keep up in this new age of working. As companies are starting to move to more virtual ways of finding opportunities and building relationships, TMG has also been actively trying to do their part, right, to help create these relationships between the local and international networks and finding opportunities for companies in this new environment. On the topic of Tokyo, Pamela and Mushir, I would love to hear more about your experience during the familiarization trip, right? What did you learn? And what were your impressions of Tokyo? Pamela, would you like to go first?
Sure. So one of the main takeaways that I had was that as I said previously, I've actually lived in 5 countries. They've all been English-speaking countries, and I've done business in all of those countries. And it was really hard, and I had to pay a lot of attention to learning about the culture, despite the fact that they were all English-speaking. And I think if you don't understand or have some sort of sensitivity towards the culture, it is very hard to do business in a foreign country, even if it's the same, if they're speaking the same language as you. So in Japan, I think with TMG, I'm really impressed about some of the services that are being offered as intermediaries, linking foreign startups to partners. It's so much easier than actually having to work for, a couple of years, which is basically what I had to do in these countries, to learn how the whole culture works and how it operates. Because sometimes we have cultures within cultures, and Silicon Valley is very evocative of that. Definitely, it has its own culture, and you can fly to LA, and it's a whole different culture. But anyway, so that culture is really important because the people are a part of that culture, and it's really good to have to be able to connect and understand what's happening and what they're actually saying, because sometimes what we think is someone saying in another culture is actually not the case, and it's can be very embarrassing, and you can lose business, basically, to be very blunt. So I really like the fact that you can actually have the intermediary of TMG who can actually support you as a foreign startup, as well with the language, but definitely with the culture. So that's the thing that's really impressed me incredibly, because I've spent a lot of years studying cultures in foreign countries to learn so I can do business. So I think that's fabulous for any startup.
Thank you for sharing, Pamela. I agree. It's a great initiative by TMG to help support the foreign companies. Mushir, could you please share a little bit as well as your impressions of the fam trip?
Yeah, I echo what Pamela was saying. I think culture is definitely one of the important elements when you're looking to come into a new country. But some of the things that I have learned over the last 3 days, wonderful sessions. Everybody's been very insightful, giving us a lot of information. 3 main takeaways for me. One is Tokyo still a strong place to do business. It's quite significant in size. It hasn't, it still has its prominence. And the very fact that TMG is running this program shows the government's initiative and push towards wanting more foreign companies to come in and increase their engagement overseas, right? So that's number one. Number two is that deep tech is quite valued, right? Technology is highly valued, and people are quite comfortable with technology. Adoption of digital payments, etc., are picking up, and it'll take a little while to do so. So if it's a fintech who's looking to come in, that's another quite a good time for them. And number three is the ecosystem, right? I think the ecosystem is ripening. On one side, on the deep tech level, there is quite a strong ecosystem. There's also a lot of money being invested in this space. while secondly, you have large corporates also quite keen on working with small corporates, right? So that is a quite essential element for foreign companies coming in. And as I said, I think the TMG plan and overall cohesiveness with the Japanese government and the King Salmon project as well, which is to help companies grow, I think is an important project, which is not just about bringing in startups and saying, we will provide you consulting, we'll provide you support, but to actually onboard their services and then help them grow, right, using that the growth of a King Salmon cycle, I think is quite relevant. So yeah.
Thank you for sharing. Just echoing something I agree as well. Tokyo is definitely a place where it's very receptive to new technologies. As you previously shared, deep tech is one of the few that's aggressively being groomed by Tokyo Metropolitan Government. A lot of funding, a lot of opportunities for companies overseas if they're looking for space to experiment. On the third question as well, right? So all four of you are incredible entrepreneurs. And I think what many people on the call, including myself, would be very interested to hear is, how would the four of you apply what you've learned during the FEM trip into your own practice? So think about it this way: if you were to start a new company, or if you were to go back in time to an earlier stage in your entrepreneur journey, when you were, say, 3 years in, right? How would you potentially approach expanding into Tokyo, right? What should people on this call or people who's going to view this webinar after take note of? Mohan, please kick things off.
Yeah, so to give context, right? So we first started doing business in Tokyo sometime around 2012. And that was mainly driven by people that we met in Singapore, who then invited us to do business there. And I can tell you, like, it was a very foreign experience for us, just navigating the environment, just navigating even how to get a local SIM card, and even how to, like, where to stay, and just navigating that experience was quite an experience, right? I distinctly remember lugging my luggage all the way from the subway station to my hotel, and yeah, so I think most of you who have done business will understand that. So having a local friendly partner on the ground, I think would have made a world of a difference for us. I think it took me maybe a good 3 to 5 trips to kind of get a sense of how to navigate Tokyo and the activities. But it took me way longer to better understand, like, the cultural challenges, figuring out how to better work or present myself or engage my local partners. And I wish I had been able to have an agency like TMG that could have, leveled up my skill, right, way before I even left Singapore to go and do business there. I think even from a success standpoint, if I had better understood the cultural nuances and how to do business better in Tokyo, it would have been a win-win, right? Both for the local businesses that we're trying to work with, and even for us, right? So that kind of an experience I wish I had had. And I think if I continue to do that as in future, right, it will be something I'll look on tapping.
Very nice to hear that. Pamela, would you like to share as well?
Sure. Basically, the thing that I'm really impressed by, and if I had a chance to do it again, living in different countries, is that I think just having that ability to network through a company like an organization like TMG is just fabulous. I'm a networker by heart, and I do it very well, and I spend a lot of energy, but it takes years to build up really good networks, and it's amazing to have an organization that would facilitate or support you in those networks, getting the right people. Unbelievable. I mean, how much time that would save, and you could get your business going so much quicker. So for me, that really stands out, the networking aspect, to have that partner in Tokyo to help you actually navigate to the right companies or the right venture firms or whoever it is that you need to connect with to get your business going. Thank you.
Thank you, Theodore. Michelle, would you like to Thank you, Pam. I'm sorry. Theodora, would you like to briefly share?
Yeah, sure. So I think for any startups, one of the key things you need to think about is what is going to be your business model, right? Are you going to go B2B or are you going to go B2B2C? That's always one of the big question. And then that plays into who are you going to target, where are you going to find them, how do they normally operate, right? And so I think having an agency such as TMG that is able to offer those kind of free consulting services and help you navigate the ecosystem and find you the partner, that will definitely cut down a lot of the time, just like what Mohan was saying. And I think the other part is growth strategy, because in the United States, for example, a lot of startups, they like to go to different accelerators, such as Plug and Play, Startup Health, and what have you. And they work with corporates and VC partners that sign on to those accelerators and find deals and partnership. But in Japan, it might work entirely different, right? As some of the things that we have heard, the models are different, the approaches are different, and CVC is actually much more active in Japan for banks, for example. And so having someone to be your guided partner, if you will, and trusted partner to navigate and connect the dots, I think that would be of tremendous help.
Very cool. And Mushia, would you like to share as well?
Well, I think, I do quite often represent B2B fintechs who are looking to scale in Asia. And if they're looking at, the Japanese market, and a few things to keep in mind is, one is that, there's quite a large asset management space and a pension space, not to mention the size of the Tokyo financial center is the third largest in the world, right? So you have that access base, but when you are going to be a startup looking to come into Tokyo, you need to keep in mind that the support system that exists with TMG, to thoroughly understand that, quite a few times people don't converse well and just come on board and then expect the world. As much as there is a lot of support from TMG, you need to be clear about what can be done, and you also need to be articulating what you need, so TMG can effectively help you in the spots. Maybe you don't need funding, maybe you need government support, or you just need connections. And one thing I have seen over the last 3 days is the network that TMG provides is very strong. There's a reputation, listening to some of the firms as well, that when they are connecting to other corporates, the fact that some of them, if they come through the program, through TMG, are recognized, and it opens up a lot of doors, right? So that is an important element, opening up of doors, as even Pemo was mentioning. Secondly is, when it comes to best practices, people should look at evaluating their language capabilities. How can they interact? As much as Tokyo is a cosmopolitan city, but across Japan, you probably will need somebody who can be on the ground for you and talk. COVID has made it easier in the short run, but especially in most of East Asia, that's the case. Being on the ground is an important element. So having partners on the ground, and that's where TMG, Accenture, etc., could be of great help. And lastly is, from what we've heard, POCs. It takes longer time, the onboarding time, if you're dealing with large corporates. So being able to negotiate your way through understanding what they need, because you'll be asked a lot of questions and a lot of information. So ensuring you have strong NDAs in place, and the corporates are comfortable signing those, but it'll take you a longer time. And if you need to do a POC, be very open about wanting a paid POC where there's a possibility of that, right? Rather than trying to do everything on the free just to impress the startup, the corporates, because they also will have budgets to onboard POCs. So yeah.
Thank you for sharing. So, like, in terms of tips, it's think it might take a longer time for POC, so you want to factor in time during that waiting period. You should also be open, right, not to do free POCs, and to share what you want to gain out of the experience. And other factors that was previously mentioned by four of you was things like partnerships is an important factor, right? And TMG is able to help facilitate these mutual connections within Tokyo, and also assessing the right business models, which is part of the free consulting services. As you mentioned, Theodora, right? Are you going to go B2B? Are you going to go B2C? What might work best for your company in another country might be, a different story in Tokyo. So part of the free consulting services program offered by TMG can help companies to access what would be their optimal model and help to implement those different strategies. Echoing as well what you mentioned, Mushia, on being able to articulate what you need. Is it funding overseas? Do you need more partners in Tokyo? It's also part of the assessment of the Invest Tokyo program to help companies find out what they could potentially do. So that's almost all of the questions that we have planned for today. Quite a quick session, so thank you all for sharing, really quickly, really straight to the point. To anyone else watching in here, if you have any questions at all, please feel free to type in the chat box. We do have some time to address these questions. But at the meantime, I do have one question in myself during the conversation that popped up in my head. Maybe for Mohan or Mushir, if you could answer this one. It would be, since both of you are covering the Asia Pacific ecosystem, Mushir, maybe you could share, what are some of the key similarities or differences between Asia ecosystems like Hong Kong and Japan?
Wow, okay. I think in the Asian ecosystem, if you're not from Asia and you're looking to come into Asia, one of the mistakes that people tend to make is that it's very homogeneous. I completely disagree. Even in markets where Mohan will be able to speak more on Southeast Asia, but Southeast Asia in itself is different cultures and different ways of engaging in each of those ecosystems. So if I need to talk about Hong Kong and the Tokyo ecosystem of Japan, I feel the key differences are Japan has been, especially Tokyo, has been catering largely to the Japanese economy for quite some time. Its size is dependent on what's happening in Japan. There's a lot of interaction when it comes to the West and export oriented, but import wise, I think there's been largely local driven, right? So whereas when it comes to what's happening now is the engagement to bring in more people in with the aging population, as well as the openness for cross-border. So I think it's a good positive. Hong Kong, on the other hand, has a strong focus on mainland China, right? It has been for the last 2 decades the gateway into mainland China, and in the next decade, I expect that to be the gateway for mainland Chinese firms who are looking to go overseas, right? So Hong Kong's role comes in there. It also acts as a financial center in the middle of Asia, bridging the east of Asia to the west of Asia, and to a certain extent the west coming in. And that's one of the few things that you see. Culturally, I feel you have slight differences. Probably, Japan is much stronger on the deep tech side across the base. Hong Kong's deep tech is strong in certain fields like biotech and AI in terms of a few initiatives, but that system is being built out, while in Japan you already have a strong existing ecosystem for that.
Thank you for sharing. Mohan, do you have anything to add on?
Yeah, so I think Mushir mentioned a lot of very relevant and spot-on comments, right? Especially, for example, with the homogeneousness of the region. Like Southeast Asia is the same thing, right? You can't look at it as one entire region. The thing that I always encourage companies to think about is, I even tell them not to think about countries, right? So don't say you want to go to Indonesia, break Southeast Asia down to cities. So talk about Jakarta, Manila, Bangkok as an example, as opposed to talk about Indonesia, because there are many tiers in the cities in the countries. So a tier 1 city in Indonesia is very different from a tier 3 city. And the best case study that you can understand, right, to figure out this is to look at the Grab versus the Gojek model. Right, if you a Grab, for example, went city by city around the region, and the services they built were to cater to tier 1 cities across Southeast Asia. A Gojek model was to go from tier 1 to tier 2 all the way down to tier 5 cities. So the services, the technologies, and the way they localize and build their products and solutions were very catered to the lower centric cities. And it's not a right or wrong, it really depends on your strategy, right? The second thing is also to think about the Southeast Asia, right? So Singapore is clearly from a fundraising side, is the hub, right? Like a large majority of the capital is still raised there. A large majority of companies from the region, including India, are Singapore registered. So it's a common knowledge to know that it's really because of IP protection, ease of doing business. But then from the regional standpoint, each of the markets actually have their own uniqueness that it could be relevant to your organizations. Indonesia, very clearly large market, very relevant for Fintech type businesses. Philippines, relevant for also Fintech type businesses, but maybe more on the remittance and the lending side. So I think you really have to go deep into figuring out where your service is relevant in which particular city in Southeast Asia.
Very interesting. So breaking it down into different cities instead of looking at it as a country as a whole is a good point. I never thought about that myself before. So thanks for sharing that really cool tip. Well, we have a question from Ilya. So she shares that, with LinkedIn not used in Japan, how do you reach out for networking purposes? So one of the ways is to participate in fairs such as Tokyo AI Expo or startup competitions. But do you guys have any other tips on ways to find potential partners for POCs, right? I mean, of course, the Invest Tokyo program is one of those ways. But in your own personal experiences, what are some of the best practices you have when trying to build connections or making network overseas? Maybe, Pamela, could you share? You do have a lot of experience, going to different countries. How can you apply what you've done when venturing to many different countries? I think you mentioned, into Tokyo as well?
Well, first of all, you have to have a lot of courage. And just to give you an example, when I went to Ireland, I joined the Dublin Chamber of Commerce and fronted up to the first event, which was a Christmas event. And I walked into, it was in a pub, of course, and I saw that there was a room that just said men only. I took my business cards in there and just went around and introduced myself to all those men. Wow. They all looked at me horrified. They were older gentlemen and obviously in a more conservative, traditional society. But the reality was for me that the only way I was going to get my business happening was to actually make those sort of contacts. So, in the end, they probably just thought of me as the pushy Aussie. But I did manage to get some amazing connections, including, some of the top political leaders in both the north and the south of Ireland. So, I think you have to be a little bit brazen and brash. You have to be willing to, to be wrong a lot of the time because you're in a different culture. And so asking advice from people in the culture that even friends who you trust to start to build that knowledge up. But yeah, I think it's definitely requires certain personal qualities to go into a foreign country, whether they speak the same language or not, and actually achieve the goal of building a business. It's very complex, it's very challenging, and you have to have a lot of energy and a lot of courage. That's my suggestion.
Very cool. So, I mean, just summarizing is being courageous. It's okay to be wrong at times and also be open to advice, right? You don't have to start immediately tackling the investors or corporations for POCs. It could be sort of working our way up, making friends, understanding the culture, and then moving up to the different companies. Mushir, you have your virtual hands raised. Oh, you're on mute, Mushir.
Yes, the statement of 2020 into 2021, you're on mute. Sorry about that. Right, so I was just going to add very quickly is one of the things that people should try to leverage in these times and otherwise is local associations, especially the Fintech associations. I'm co-founder of the Fintech Association of Hong Kong, so I know the value that has given our members, not just based in Hong Kong, but especially for people coming overseas. A little while ago, I had somebody message me who just joined the Hong Kong Fintech Association from Singapore, talking about how it's helping him understand the association through various chat forums, etc. For Japan, there is the Fintech Association of Japan with Takeshi-san, who leads that, and then you have Fintech Tokyo as well with Norbert. So I would recommend those if somebody is looking to network and try to get in beyond LinkedIn, is to connect with those associations and also talk to them to bridge that gap, because they will have ways of connecting their startups or companies looking to enter Japan. So yeah. Very cool. So tapping into associations for help. And maybe Mohan, you also have experience doing business in Japan quite a while back ago. LinkedIn probably might not have been the sole way of networking back then at that time. So what are some tips and tricks that you had, right? What was your experience like?
Yeah, so a lot of the business relationships that we have built, right, are definitely with people from Japan that have a good amount of international exposure, right? So they are naturally to be more active on these platforms. They have been like or have traveled to Southeast Asia, so it really helps to connect with the more internationally exposed Japanese people. So that way, right, they are definitely more open to meeting foreigners and also more open to helping out the foreigners to find win-win solutions, right? So that has been one thing that has been helpful for us. The other thing that has been really helpful is that sometimes you really have to be open and put yourself in uncomfortable situations, like what Pimo mentioned, right? Like we used to go for various conferences in Japan, and it was very natural to want to stick to maybe the Taiwanese or the other Singaporeans or the basically the non-Japanese that were there, right? But I think in most cases, just going out there, trying to be a bit more patient and trying to communicate with people and sharing with them a bit more what you do really helps, right? And that's when you realize actually a lot of the folks in Japan are actually very comfortable and very helpful in helping foreigners. And once you win their trust, right, I think they're definitely very open to supporting them. And I think it's also important to understand little nuances like the gifting culture, like making an effort, right, to learn simple things like the gifting culture, or even, for example, when you sit in a business meeting with a group, how do you make sure that the drinks of the people on the left and right and the ones opposite you cups are full? Like little things like that where you make an effort to learn. I think it goes a long way, and the locals really appreciate that. So I think it requires, if you're genuine about doing business in Japan, you do have to take the time and effort to learn about all the little things that really make the Japanese culture amazing and unique.
Very interesting. So it's really a culture around what echoing what you said of respect, right? You know, putting other people's first, making sure that their cups are full before yours as a way to build trust, to build businesses. Very interesting. We have a question from Bradley as well. So Japan has become a top 10 global investor in areas of technology like fintech and AI. Do Japanese venture firms invest in companies that don't necessarily focus solely on the Japanese market? What are you seeing? I think this could be a question in two ways, right? What's happening with Japanese investors, but also for VCs, portfolio strategies overseas as well. So maybe Theodore, you could briefly share about some of the strategies that you applied to your own funds or what you're seeing in trends overseas, right? Do VCs necessarily invest in companies that are not solely focusing on their sort of national grounds?
Yeah, I think so. So we do partner with a colleague in Europe, actually, and they are more of a sustainability focus, right? They're looking at how can you find startups that are making a substantial impact in the areas of ESG, and they look around the world. So those are the type of firms that are more focused on a particular theme rather than a country. So there are those. And I think earlier, what we heard with the UTech fund, that was also really interesting, right? Is they are established in Japan, and they are extending outside of Japan, looking for deep tech startups that are in an early stage, but also be applicable to transfer the technology and the know-how back into Japan. And I think that is the beautiful part about, call it if you will, globalization, is how can you facilitate transfer of knowledge and talent so that you are not so much so geographically based, but more so how can you leverage what you learn in one ecosystem and apply it to another.
Very cool. Thanks for sharing that. So anyone that wants to add on to that question, Penmo, Mushir, Mohan, anything?
So a lot of I can share with you that the initial interest and rise in Southeast Asia startups was really driven by Japanese VCs. So quite a few of the unicorns, for example, Bukalapak, right, were actually invested by corporate venture firms and VCs that were set up like way back in 2010, right? So I think Japanese firms definitely still do have an appetite and interest in investing outside of Japan. If you look at another venture firm, VNext, they've been very active in India for the last 5 years. And then now, so they just recently announced their new partner in Indonesia, and they are purely a Japanese started fund. Right? So it's important to look at which are the investors that actually have either offices or staff that are outside of Japan, and it can take them some time to do that sometimes. So, for example, Global Brain, which is another very active VC in this region, didn't have an office or a local representative for a long time, but they were very open to traveling here, and they say they're coming here every other month. Yeah. So I do think that the Japanese investors are actively and very openly investing outside of Japan. But I also do think that a lot of them are still focused on Japan because in that sense, that's where they can provide the most value add. It's the same logic with the Silicon Valley investors, primarily investing in companies that are domiciled or focused on the US market.
Thank you. Pamela, you have your virtual hands raised. Feel free to add on.
So I'd just like to make a quick point, and that is that venture is smart money. And so I think John made a wonderful point earlier from UTI that he said that, basically it has to be, they have to help the startup. And if it's got nothing to do with them, they don't have that expertise because it's not to do with Japan, then I think, there's no point in going to a Japanese investor. You obviously, that's why the Silicon Valley investors used to like to invest locally. Obviously, that's changed over the last 10 years, but that's the reason, is so that they can actually contribute their smart knowledge about their experience and their background as, first of all, usually as a founder and then as an investor. So I think you need to take that on board for whatever reason you've asked that question. Okay. Thanks.
Thank you for sharing, Pamo. Yeah, so Bradley, to summarize the question, the answer is yes, right? Japanese investors are looking to invest overseas, but of course it's important to understand who in particular are you trying to target, right? Do they have portfolio or offices overseas? So examples like VNext, Global Brain, these are good examples of Japanese VCs who have offices overseas and trying to transfer knowledge from those different countries into Tokyo. And it's also good to emphasize the story of the company itself on the focus on its theme rather than where you're based at this point of time and the value that you can bring into Tokyo market. One question that I have, Theodora, maybe if you could answer this, is what are some ways or interesting tips and tricks, right? So you mentioned that it's difficult to build new relationships at this point in time, right? How can companies actually look to actually, secure funding at this stage? Have you seen any interesting strategies? What tips or insights do you have?
Well, that is $1 million question. Network. That is the only way. What I have been seeing is I'm seeing a lot of women and also women from communities of color that are very active in trying to connect people together. So I've seen it multiple times. For example, on Twitter, someone would post, hey, I have a question and I want to connect with a particular type of startup. And next thing you know, we'll start seeing threads being formed and people helping each other. And I think part of that is probably because we are all glued to the screen for like 12 hours a day or 15 hours a day. But I think the other part of it is we are seeing what we have been doing was not working, right? And so we are more conscious, and hopefully this trend will continue as we get out of the house and be able to travel, that we will bring that spirit with us, knowing that there is a lot of social injustice in our society, knowing that we need to shed our bias. I think when we can travel, we're very comfortable with always going towards people that we know, like what Mohan was saying, hanging out with people, that is from your community that you feel comfortable with, and breaking out from it, reaching out into people, right? Reaching out into people who start accelerators, reaching out to people that are very active on social media that always volunteer to help you can find those people. And, you know, I'm always active and I'm always more than happy to connect people.
Very cool. Thank you for sharing. And perfect that Pemo has your hand raised again. I was about to ask you if you have any, you know, insights to share as well.
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to. I didn't turn it off. And again, a virtual error. My apologies.
No worries at all. So I think with that, we can close this session. Time is more or less up, and we are on time. So a big thank you to, you know, the 4 amazing panelists on this session and the new Invest Tokyo ambassadors of 2021. To those of you who are watching or who will watch this webinar, thank you so much for your time. We hope our conversation provided new insights into navigating Tokyo, and that you also gained some new tactics to enter the market and to find new opportunities for growth. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to any one of us via LinkedIn. We'll be more than happy to respond and offer support when needed. And also, as part of the Invest Tokyo program, we have several other initiatives lined up for this year. For example, next week, we have the Tokyo Financial Awards ceremony taking place, where TMG will be selecting the Fintech and ESG investor winners for 2020. If you're keen to find out more or how to participate next year, do check that out, or head to the Invest Tokyo website for more information. So thank you, everyone. Stay safe and take care.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Take care. Have a good weekend. Bye.
Bye.